Hey everybody, we'll give people some time to jump into the room, but I'm so excited for our second live stream of our summer Art Journal Snacks box. This is our second summer, so excited to be spending another summer with you all art journaling, and really looking forward to what we're going to get into today, which is by special request. So if you're not familiar with our community Mix is where we connect with each other and share our journals and share ideas. And it's been our place to also make special requests. And there was a request to talk about writing in the journal, right? You hear journal and sometimes you think writing. And an art journal is different in that it's a little more image and art making forward, but writing does play a big part in the way that I do a journaling practice, and really looking forward to sharing today, incorporating words and writing and journaling into image-based art. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm Dr. Erin Partridge. I'm an art therapist. I'm not doing therapy right now, although some of what we do you might find therapeutic. And I am the resident artist for ArtJournalSnacks, and very excited to be doing this journaling with you all today. So please do let us know where you're watching from, and any questions that you have you can put into the chat, and I'll be sure to address them at some point. If they're pressing questions, we'll make sure we get to them right away. Like if it's about something I'm doing in that moment, I would so love to answer your question as we're going through it. Some of you might be journaling along with us. Some of you might be watching and journaling later. Please share what you create. We'd love to see it, whether that's on Instagram or on Mix or elsewhere. We'd love to see what you're up to. So with that, I'm going to jump over to the desktop and get right into journaling. Okay. So as always, I have multiple journals with me because that's, I think, a better way to kind of show a lot of things in a short period of time. The first thing I wanted to start with today, though, was an exciting find. Sometimes we talk about what we want on the cover of our journals, and I was really excited to find this in a catalog, and it says Summer 2024. So what a perfect thing to start to build up the cover of the Summer 2024 Art Journal Snacks journal. So I'm sure this cover will evolve over time, but I wanted to put this on right now since I found it. And one of the things that I do with materials that I find that I'm not quite ready to incorporate in, I'll just kind of stuff them inside my journal. So here's another example. And that one, I'm just not quite ready to stick down yet. So I'm just going to keep it living right in there. Okay, so let's go to a blank-ish page. There we go. So a blank page, as we talked about last time, a blank page can be really intimidating, and it can also be a page with lots of possibilities, right? It's something that we can dive right into and really start to decide where we want to go with our journaling practice. And you can do this in the way that you would traditionally journal, right? So you might pick up a pen or a pencil and just start writing, like maybe writing something about the best part of the day. And maybe that's where you start and you pause for a moment. And I really find that when I'm writing in my journal, especially if I know that it's going to be the backdrop for more art, I try not to censor myself too much, knowing that I can go back later and cover over any of those things that maybe I don't need. But I'm going to think about the best part of my day, which was sitting in the morning sun, with a kind person with twinkling eyes telling me the things she was worried about and hopeful for. and asking how to help. Okay, so the best part of the day was sitting in the morning sun with a kind person with twinkling eyes, telling me the things she was worried about and hopeful for, and asking how to help. And so when I start a page like this where I've got a lot of writing, it's a very specific thing. Sometimes I like to go in next with something colorful to start to pull out the words that are maybe more important or more tied to the theme of this. And I know that I promised someone I would be a little less messy in this session, but I just can't resist. I just can't resist these chalks because they're so vibrant and colorful, and it feels like, I don't know, the right thing for this idea of twinkling eyes. So I promise I won't do too many messy things, but sometimes we need to spread a little chalk around. And so one of the things that you can see when I put chalk over top of graphite pencil is the graphite, because it embosses a little bit into the paper when you write, especially if you write exuberantly, you will get almost a little bit of a ghosting around the edge of it, which is fun. Okay, so how to help, twinkling eyes, hopeful. And kind person. So those are the parts of this that I really want to start to emphasize. Okay, we'll chalk aside for a moment. And then thinking about what this, like what the imagery in this is calling out to me to do is to do something a little bit more expressive, a little bigger. So I'm actually going to, even though I just put chalk onto this, I'm going to spray it with water to get the whole page a little bit wet. And you can see what happens. It kind of activates the chalk and helps it sink down into the paper a little bit more. And then I'm going to go in with a little bit of watercolor. I want a little bit of, this is some chrome yellow. And I want to really pull out this idea of twinkling eyes. Because when I think about this person and sitting in the sun, this felt like a really important part of what was the best part of the day. It was the combination of the sun and the kind of the wrinkles around the edge of the eyes and the smile that communicated, right? Because twinkling eyes has a couple different connotations, I suppose. Like, could be older, could also be mischievous, and maybe there was a little bit of that. Okay. But see how now the words, like the text itself of the journal page, is a little bit less to the foreground, right? We're now starting to focus a little bit more on these other words. So I'm going to go in even a little bit more. Just to put a little bit more emphasis into these words. And it also, as you can see, is obscuring it a little bit too. So remember that your art journal is for you, right? Though many of us post our art journals, and I certainly post a lot of pages on Mix and online and share them, and happy to sit down and flip through a journal with people. It is for you. So sometimes you'll write something and it'll start to feel a little bit more vulnerable, or like maybe you don't want it out in front of everybody. And you can start to find ways to incorporate it a little bit deeper into the page that you're creating, so it becomes maybe a little bit more just for you, right? So I'm going to put a little wax paper behind these two now because I'm going to do something else. And I want to make sure that this page doesn't stick to the other. is one of the other things when I think about this experience of sitting in the sun, sitting in the morning sun. We were also two people with relatively pale skin sitting in the sun, and she kept asking me if I wanted a hat and if I was going to get sunburned. So this is that idea of kind of getting flushed in the sun a little bit, but it was worth it. So I'm putting this is a couple different acrylic paints mixed together. So you can see, and it's like kind of mixed very coarsely, meaning it's not very blended. So if I move the brush around inside this jar, sometimes I'll get a little bit more of a peachy color. There's also some yellow in here. So it's not like straight from a tube. Okay. I'm going to go back to my crusty pencil here for a minute while the acrylic is still wet. And now I'm making marks that are not writing. I'm scratching into the surface here with the same pencil. So I know that I'm transferring a little bit of graphite onto this surface. But very quickly, we go from a really simple page, right? Just pencil on paper, to something that's starting to be a little more complex. It's starting to maybe contain a little bit more of that experience of being with this person. And then when I think about this idea of it being the best part of the day, well, that definitely needs a little bit of gold. Got a complicated relationship with gold in art right now. But I guess I'm going to show that it can be done without being obnoxious. Sometimes metallics can look a little bit forced, so I'm always thinking about how can I take this metallic thing and make it look more interesting, a little bit more lived in, I guess is a good way to put it. I have one more thing that I'll probably add to this page later that I'm seeing in my little stash of art supplies here that'll help to make this a little bit more lived in. But I'm going to set this one aside for the time being and go to another blank page and another ArtJournalSnacks journal. And this one's not entirely blank, right? Because as we've been talking about, we've got the nice bleed through here at the stitch lines of this journal, which is, again, why I love this journal, because it's got the stitched binding, which means, one, it holds together well, and two, you can activate that gutter with more pigment so that you don't turn the page and end up with a completely blank page. We also have some bleed through here. This is Olo marker bleeding through from the other side to get this nice ghostly color coming through. And it kind of worked out perfectly with what I was planning. Is I've got a little blue and a little red. And then I have this old, some of you maybe remember this, some of you used it, maybe some of you are not old enough to have used this when you were little, but we used to get this all the time. And I guess because I can still get it, it is a practice still, but this was like learning cursive writing and learning to write all your letters. And so it has this automatically built-in nostalgia for many of us. And then it's also just a fun graphic element. So I'm going to put it here knowing that it's going to wrap over a little bit to the next page. And on this one, I wanted to also use these. So these crack me up. These are like cheap index labels for office supplies, and they like die cut it off from where the printing is. So they printed it and then they did the little kiss cut cuts, but they're not quite lined up, which stuff like that just kind of delights me. Finding these problematic design things. But it works out well for putting just like right on the edge of the art journal. So thinking about, things that could live in shapes like this, or maybe a date, right? So some of you like to date the things that you write or certain pages. I don't tend to date pages in my journal, but sometimes I do date the journal start and finish. But every so often, if I'm writing something that's very specific to that day and it's important to me that I remember that, then I will put a date, right? But for this page, I was thinking about how sometimes writing something methodically and slowly helps you come to a sense of like a new understanding of what it is that you're writing about. So I am going to answer a question. Okay, so that's a big question, big existential question. And so sometimes phrasing something like that, why I am here now, right? It gives you an opportunity to make a declaration, but also engage in a little bit of like maybe wondering, right? So if things are hard, why am I here right now? What am I learning in this moment? Or, if you are at the cusp of a transition in your life, why am I here right now? What is this here to teach me? Or why am I here right now in my journal? What did I come here to do, right? So some people like to start off their journaling sessions by setting an intention or thinking about what am I going to journal about today? So why I am here in this journal is I find that writing in cursive helps me slow down. So I'm here to explore the ways I can be more curious Okay, so I am here to explore the ways I can be more curious and be more open to everything I encounter. And I really think that for me, this idea of more expressive journaling is one of the ways that I do that, right? So it definitely inspires curiosity. It's definitely something that helps me to explore. And the art making process, especially when you get really mixed media, you have to be open and you have to be curious and you have to be ready for the things that you encounter, right? Because materials are going to behave in different ways. So you can see that adding the water over the ink pen that we received in this quarters box, it bleeds, and it bleeds differently on this more fibrous, cheap writing practice paper than it would on other paper, right? But that, in my mind, is something that we should be playing with more. And it's such a great reason to work in a journal, because you can explore these things and then you decide, wow, I really, really like the way that the lines of my writing stay put. And it is still readable, but it's kind of fuzzy, right? It's kind of fading a little bit. And that might be something you want to explore in a different way. So if you like the way that looks, then working on something like newsprint, which is pretty much the same paper quality as this, will get you that same effect, right? So you maybe do a portrait, or maybe you do some sketching, and you play with the way that that pen moves around. And then if you look closely, bring this up a little closer, you can really see how it's almost like it's growing roots or veins, or the words are kind of spreading out. And we think about these words, right? Curiosity and openness and encountering, like it's just perfect with that, right? So what else is on this page, right? I've got a little bit of blue coming over here. I've got this red. I feel like I want to do something that pops a little bit more on this page, something a little bit brighter and bigger. And sometimes that's a piece of ephemera. And sometimes it's just a big, bold piece of color. So I'm looking to see what I can grab. Okay, so this is kind of a weird thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have this some ephemera that I pulled. This is the artwork of an artist, Nancy Graves, that was in a book. And it's these 3 camels, and I just really I like the way they're standing. I like the work first, and then I really just like the way that their posture. That would be kind of fun to incorporate it into a page. Then, of course, I'm going to lose this bird on this other side, which some of you might be shocked that I'm choosing camels over a bird, but I did grow up on a ranch with llamas, so camelid creatures are also my friends. A former co-worker who called me Dr. Bird Lady, and I definitely am, but I like all creatures. They all have a spot in my art journal. And then the other thing, again, this is like gonna be kind of weird, but I have this is from like a 1940s, I think it was a Sears catalog that one of our wonderful ArtJournalSnacks subscribers sent to me. And she kind of has this curious look. And then I also like the way that her hat is almost instead like a halo, or and it's interesting to me to think about how she might get incorporated in here with the camels. So what if we try to see if she fits here? And if she doesn't, I'm sure we'll find another home for this. So if you're cutting old paper, just have to be a little bit careful because it rips very easily. So whereas with magazine papers from more contemporary, modern, current magazines, you can kind of use the blade of the scissor to cut along long lengths. Really, really don't want to do that with this old paper. Some of the ephemera that I send you, you want to be careful when you're cutting because it can rip so easily. And it's not, again, it's not the end of the world. There are always ways that you can save it, rescue it, put it back together. And sometimes those broken pieces end up being just as, if not more, interesting. So I'm going to save her little shadow there. Maybe here too. So I really like these stairs that she's standing on. Seems to be a theme in my journals right now. I have another page with stairs. So if I put her here, I lose the camels. If I put her here, I lose their humps, but I could add them back in. So I think that's what I'm going to do. We've got 3 camels, all both with 2 humps. And we'll put her on there. And if you're wondering what that loud chirp is in the background, it's the most impossibly tiny bird you've ever seen. I have 10 birds here with me right now. And that's a tiny, tiny baby quail. Okay, so I don't want to lose the camel's head. Okay, so there's my curious journaling self. And then thinking about how I might add these back in, there's kind of 2 ways you could go about it. You could add dark in over top, or it's like that's actually going to work. You could also kind of pick away a little bit at part of her dress. And maybe be able to peel some of that up. That I'm going to leave. I think that's fine. And then this one. That one I'm going to leave because I like the stairs. I don't want to lose that. Okay, so I'll put a little bit of turquoise back in there with her dress. Just to kind of get rid of that white around the edge there. A little bit here too for the edge of that part. You can see how strangely the watercolor sits on this old catalog paper. It takes it a little while to sink in, but it eventually will. Okay, so put a little bit of that on the edge of this page. Starting to bring some of that color around the other parts of the page. So in my own journaling practice, how do I work on pages? When I'm using writing, sometimes I'll just write words on a page and leave it and then come back to it later, right? If I have a feeling right now in this moment and I really need to write it down, I'll just write a word, a phrase, I'll scrawl some things out, and then I'll come back later and do what I'm doing now, which is to add color and imagery and other things into that page. And then sometimes I sit down and the whole page happens all at once, right? So it's kind of being open to any and all of those things happening. So I'm going to pull a little bit more of the red back into this. And also start to incorporate a little bit of where the camel meets the page. And then you can see where there are places where the red isn't quite going across where that edge is. And so I could leave that, or once this paper here on this side dries a little bit, I can come back in and add maybe tissue paper over that edge or do something else. Just want you to see this thing that happened right here, which I love. See where the colored pencil stick kind of skipped along the edge there, and because of the edge of the book, right? So that's like a rubbing from the edge of the journal, which is super meta and awesome. And now I want to just do a bunch of that because I can wrap it around to the other side. It's kind of cool. That's a rubbing from the journal itself. Very cool. All right. So I think I'm going to leave that page where it is and just go right into the next page so I can wrap this edge around. That's dry enough, I think, to turn this page. So one of the ways to get a nice full looking edge to your journal when you're done is to do what I'm doing right now, which is to wrap paper from one page around the edge to the other. And then when you look at your journal from the edge, you end up having this really robust looking, very full journal because the pages end up looking thicker than they are. Okay, so there we have that nice page there. All right, so I wanted to show a little bit of what I meant when I say like start with just one word. So here's a great way to do that. These are just stick-on letters. You can get these lots of different places. These ones happen to be kind of the cheaper children's version. There's very fancy vinyl lettering, which I love to use as well. But this will work just perfectly for what we're up to. And I'm going to do it here. These are repositionable, which is not great in a journal, but it's fine if you go over the top of it with some more, like whether it's acrylic paint or adhesive. The nice thing about the repositionable ones is what I'll show you we're going to do with these, is you very much can, because they won't stick to the paper. So you can see I can put it down and then peel it back up. So guess what I'm going to do with that, right? So thinking about this idea of feeling, we were talking about last week at work, about what you do with strong feelings, or I don't remember how it was phrased exactly, but I said that I scribble with both hands. So I'm going to build up some layers here. And if you know that you're going to end up peeling the letters back off, one thing to just watch is that if you're going over the top and it has any kind of raised up component, you'll end up with a little bit of a wider space around it. So you kind of do need to go a little closer to the edge of the letter form. Okay. So I'm going to brush the leftover colored pencil away, and then I can peel these guys up. And I can put them down again. Because we all know how feelings work, right? You don't ever feel just one thing. And so here's an opportunity to play with all the different ways that we can feel. So I'm going to next use, I think, a marker. That's a good one. It's a Copic marker, which means that I'll get a little bleed through onto the next page, which is fine because I can keep playing with that. And you can see that the Copic, the wax crayon that I was using, and a little bit the colored pencil will resist. And it also blends some of the pigment that's sitting on top of these letters onto the page. You can see it's not the pure color from the pen that's coming out right now. And before I peel this up from this layer, I'm going to go back to our wonderful marker that we got in this month, or this quarter's ArtJournalSnacks box, to do some finer lines. So we played with this a little bit last time about how you can get some variation in your line at the more brush tip side. And then you have a little bit more of a fine line, or a lot more of a fine line with the other one. So I'm being careful because there is wax on this page, but this is a pretty hardy pen. It stands up to quite a bit. And then I'm going to add some water onto this to just, again, blend a little bit of that ink so it's not quite so much of a hard line. I was thinking about this pen last week because I went to an exhibit of Japanese woodblock prints at the Legion of Honor in San Francisco. And it had some of the most tiny, beautiful, thin lines that were created with woodblock, which you just can't even imagine. They were so phenomenal. And then these bold marks, right? And this back and forth between those two things. And I think this pen really does a beautiful job of getting those contrasts. Okay, so hot tip, if you're going to peel things off and the paper is wet, you're going to rip your paper. So you want to let that part dry. So we'll let that side dry a little bit while we play with some of the other area here. And so one of the things that you might think about doing is, like, how many feelings am I feeling right now, right? So, like, take a breath, think about it. How many feelings am I feeling right now in this moment? And if that feels overwhelming, you might just start doing something that is mindless. meaning, I mean, it's a little bit, you're a little bit aware because you don't want to mess up, right? But writing numbers is a way to just kind of get your heart and a little bit of your emotional brain out of it. Okay, so 38. And then I have this here, which came from a moleskin notebook. And when I think about this idea of feelings, and some of what we try to do with feelings is we kind of try to measure them, right? Like, which, gosh, people in my field definitely try to do that. How do we measure emotions? And I think it's a hard thing to quantify. But it is definitely something that I think we can measure with our art, right? And our expressive media, expressive tools. So I have a ruler in here. I've got some numbers, and I've got the word feeling. And now it needs something else. And one of the things I was thinking was now going to our nori piece and thinking about just a little bit more texture. So I've got a couple different textured papers here. And one of the things that the nori paper does, or the nori paste does so nicely, is helps us stick papers that otherwise can be a little bit tricky, right? So some rice paper, this paper is a little bit more fibrous, and this one's a little bit thicker. But it will help us build up an interesting texture. I'd be curious to hear those of you who've been playing with the nori paste. How low is your container getting? I'm aware I might need to re-up my supply before the end of this journal. Been having so much fun using it. So there was a little bit of orange paint on this brush. I'm not worried about it. I'm going to put straight edge next to straight edge there. And so now some of my numbers are going to start to disappear, which really fits with what I was talking about, this idea of like, how do we even measure the things that we're feeling? Can we count it? Because we all kind of have our own ways of measuring those things, right? Guess you could measure your day by how many art journal pages did I do today? I covered too many of my numbers there. How many art supplies did I touch today? That would be an interesting one. We'll have to start counting that. So the little tiny bird you hear chirping is no bigger than this nori paste container. So I'm using a little bit of more fibrous rice paper in a different way to kind of help to hide some of those straight edges. You can see how that, it really doesn't take all that long to start to build a really interesting and complex texture on a page. I think one of the things that I've been noticing, and that like a lot of the questions I've been getting about words and about writing, is people feel like they're just kind of slapped on the surface. And so this is one of the ways that you can add more depth is through this idea of texture and layers. So for people that are collaging words on or writing on, and then they say, it feels like I'm just labeling it, right? It's not incorporated into the rest of the page. And so this is a way to start to do that, to help it live a little bit more solidly on the page. I have a few more scraps, and I think I'm going to hold those aside for a bit until I decide if I want to incorporate them in. All right, and we'll let that dry so that I can peel those letters off, and I'll keep going with that page after that dries for a bit. Okay. So this is the third journal that I brought. This one is almost done, as you can see. It's pretty full. And this is a journal that I made, and it's made from old book pages and other things. I started this on the 13th of July. And I wanted to show this in this session a little bit more because it incorporates both written words as well as found words. And this one, actually, this page has multiple found words in it, and some writing as well. So sometimes what I'll go through and do is just cross out the words that don't speak to me. And sometimes what I'll do is like here, where I'm circling the words that do stand out and then Xing out the rest. Yeah, the baby bird is having a lot of feelings. That's the oldest of them, is very vocal. It says, "Please come hold me in your hand," is what it's saying. Okay. More incorporating of text. Here's some different ways of doing that with lots of different text, but you can see here this, if it was just the text and just the eyes on this page, it wouldn't feel as cohesive and it would kind of feel scattered. But this little bit of orange that crosses over the whole page really helps it to feel more like a composition than feel like a page full of writing. Let's go. So again, here, right, like just the words are kind of in response to what's here on the text, but here I'm thinking about the text more as a texture in the background. I know what the content of it is, and some of it feels relevant to some things that I'm exploring, but this felt like the most important thing. And this is more of that same really fibrous tissue paper or mulberry paper I was using. Okay. I wanted to play more with this page because it shows these are vinyl letters, so these ones do not peel off. This was from a magazine, and this was some writing that I did while I was at an art exhibition with some folks, thinking about this piece that was a collage, but you wouldn't have necessarily known it unless you read the wall label. And I was thinking about how interesting that is, that like this idea that we have about how the label on the wall sometimes tells us something that our eyes aren't seeing. And metaphorically, that was just an interesting thing to me. So I thought this would be a good example to play with because it's kind of three different things, right? And there's a little bit of scribbling on this page. There's a little bit of color, but how do we start to help this page work together, right? And the obvious way is to put an eye here, but I already have a page with eyes in this journal, and not that that's the like be all end all of my decision, but it does kind of feel like, well, this isn't the journal of eyes. So what can I do that will start to help this page be more cohesive? So I've got I'm looking at these little stripy things in the background, and I have some washi tape here that has some different stripes on it. And that helps me lose right there the edge of the magazine page. So now already that starts to look less like a page that I just pulled out of a magazine. And then one thing that I like to do with, if I incorporate washi tape in, is to have not all of it be the same width, meaning I'm not just peeling the tape off from the roll and sticking it into my journal. I'm tearing parts of it in half or even smaller into little bits. So then it looks a little bit less produced, shall we say, right? So now I'm looking at this page and thinking about what can I do that'll help this fit together a little bit more. One way would be to go with a completely other color, something kind of shocking, or to go with something more textured, or to kind of darken all of this all over. And I think what I would like to do is go for a bit of texture. And I might regret this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So this is matte medium mixed with gray acrylic paint. So I'm going to go lighter on this page. And the writing that I was doing in this journal was we were at the exhibition trying something out where we were looking at the art for a long period of time without reading the labels. And it was a little bit of a tricky show to do that because there was poetry on the wall and there was all this other writing that was part of the show. But we noticed that, that just looking at the art, spending time with the art helped us see it in a different way. We would find different meaning in it. Okay, so I'm putting this on kind of messy so that I can do some other things with it. I'm going to go back to the colors that are on this page. So this is a little bit of liquid watercolor. So it's similar to the watercolor that we got in this box, but this color I think will work a little better with what I'm doing here. So sorry, I'm getting messy now. I wasn't as messy as last time. But I'm going to get my spray bottle out again. You can see this is dripping around a bit. And I'm just going to activate this and let it move around. It's going to kind of sink into those little areas where the acrylic paint is. A little bit into the margins. And I do want this text to still be readable, so I'm going to brush a little bit of this ink away from that. And see how it's settling into those brush marks there? I really love that. So here's another thing to just be aware of is that sometimes with a lot of pigment that settles right into the gutter of your page, it starts to look like your whole journal is a journal in a series of double page spreads. So you might think about how you have things that are crossing over that disrupt that idea of like a straight line down the middle. And some of it will be unavoidable because of the different pigments, but it is just a thing to be aware of. The rhythm as you move through the journal. One way to avoid that is to let it rest or dry in a way that the center of the book is up a little higher, which is what I'm going to do with this one. Stick under there. Stick a stamp underneath there. So then the edges, it'll all just kind of roll to the edges and not sit there in the gutter. Okay. We'll go back to this one, which is dried now. And what I was thinking I would do is, this is a metallic ink. It's kind of a greenish gold. And I'm going to use a very soft brush just to give this gold paint up here a little bit more complexity. And it's a little bit less straight out of the tube, shiny metallic. A little bit more vintage or antique looking. I like a really soft brush for something like this because you can blend it around a little bit. Okay. And then since it's sitting here, and it does kind of go with the colors, even though this is anything but vintage and antique looking, I'm for reals going to use a little bit of neon here on the edge. It starts to bring that bright color back in. And you can always make a decision like that and then soften it back or darken it back later. We kind of lost the word hope, so I want to bring it back in. And the word help got lost a little bit too, which is funny. Okay, so this is a page that wants to be something. And if we're thinking about writing and incorporating words, one way is to do that as texture. So this comes from that same vintage catalog. Look at these fabulous patterns, by the way. These will feature on some other page somewhere for sure. But some of the descriptions of this clothing, like what it will do for you, cracks me up. And paper like this is such a great thing to use the nori paste for, because it's a little bit delicate, and because the nori paste enables you to make, so I'm going to crumple this up. Don't worry too much. So crumpling up this vintage paper has now given me some very easy break points. See how it just kind of comes apart? Here. I'm going to leave this because it's watercolor ground and it'll make something nice later. A nice texture for something. So I have my, there's the little lady that was in this description. And this fabric was $148 a yard, which for any of you that have priced fabric lately, that might sound bonkers. So I'm going to save one of these little pieces. So I'm not going to put the puzzle all the way together. Save this other one over here. So I realized that over here was off screen. There we go. By the way, some of these patterns were described as pensive fabric patterns for your clothing. I don't know that I've ever had a pensive dress. Maybe that should be a new goal. So the color of that vintage paper works really, really nicely with this kind of buff watercolor ground that's on here. Now, one thing that I'm realizing that when I put the watercolor ground on and then I put a piece of wax paper in there, it got a little bit of a kind of a waxy surface on it, but I think it'll still be okay to play with. Yeah, it did. So love wax paper for protecting my pages from sticking to each other, but just be aware that sometimes a little bit of that wax does come off on the surface. And again, for me, that's never a problem. I always see these things as features, not bugs in the system of mixed media art journaling. So I'm going to get this pretty wet. And sometimes when I put text down that doesn't have meaning in the moment, it comes to me later that actually that word I was making fun of is actually kind of a poignant word for me right now. So I'm writing right into wet, which I'm doing carefully because I don't want to ruin my pen. You can get a little bit of that word there, and it'll show up a little bit more later, and then I can go back in with some other media and make it stand out a little more. You can do that with a pencil. See how that's helping the ink to even stand out a little bit more? And then because the word is over here, I want to highlight it on this side too. So I've got that repetition of the two words. And then since we're continuing to play with nori paste, I think I'm going to use, I've been holding on to this rice paper because I really like it, but I think in the interest of encouraging you all to do it, don't save your ephemera forever. Just start using it, right? Sometimes we hold on to these things and we feel, oops, sorry, long-handled brush. We feel like we can't use it, right? But you should be using it. Go for it. That's what it's for. So putting it on right now while there's still wet watercolor, the little bit of the watercolor pigment will bleed into this rice paper, which is really nice. So a little bit more of the color will move around on the page. It'll also start to create a surface where this waxy surface is, where I put the watercolor ground, that I can then go back in and put pigment on. So if you end up with a situation like this and you're like, I made a whole waxy area, what am I going to do now? You can take something like tissue paper or mulberry paper or rice paper and nori paste, because nori paste will accept watercolor on top or colored pencil on top. So really a lot of different media on top. So you can reclaim that area that you wanted to do more media with the nori paste. See another phrase in that advertisement, top flight fashions they offer. It's another thing. I don't know that I've ever had top flight fashion. Top flight fashion doesn't really fit well with being an artist. In the interest of being more neat today, I did not change my shirt when I got home from work, so I am wearing a work shirt so that I wouldn't get too wild and crazy with the media. But as you can see, I kind of did so anyway. Okay. So just that, right? Just adding a couple of elements start to make this feel a little bit more like a cohesive page that's blending together. I think what happens sometimes is we want to put everything onto one page, right? Just like, I have all this stuff and I'm going to put it all here. And what happens when we do that is it starts to feel a little bit chaotic. I think some of you have experienced that, where you look at the page when you're done, you're like, I don't know even what this is about anymore. And it feels messy and I'm not sure what's going on. I don't like the way it looks at the end. And first of all, I would say maybe don't criticize your art because it did something for you at the time. And also, sometimes it's just letting yourself work on multiple pages at once, knowing that you don't have to finish every page in one sitting, and allowing yourself a little time to pause and do something like this where you're just watching the pigment move around on the page, giving yourself a little breathing room while you're creating. I'm working pretty fast right now because I have a lot of things I want to show you all, but you don't have to work at that speed. Sometimes I'll sit down and I'll just paint color on a page and just enjoy that process of painting color on a page. I'll go back and forth between a few different pages. So I see where this is going. Sorry for the sound. I just threw our supplies on the floor.
Hey, Aaron, this is Lee.
Hey.
Hey, it's looking awesome. I love this. Just giving you a time check here. We're at a 1 hour, and I'd say like maybe another 25 minutes or so.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So now I've highlighted that word pensive a little bit more. That's great. Let me just grab the ephemera I threw on the floor. The other thing you'll see if you follow the Art Journal Snacks on Instagram or over on Mix is you'll see the after of doing these live streams and the incredible chaos mess that I make, which is very fun. All right, so we'll let that ink dry a little bit. And because of the texture on this page, this is a page that I can come back into and add a little more color on top. And maybe something will live in this box. I don't know yet. It might stay just a square of color, or maybe there will be some kind of imagery that ends up going there. Good. I'm glad I'm not the only person who drops stuff on the floor. And I'm stoked to see some Enzo folks in the chat. That's great. So we actually made journals at Enzo not so long ago. And we have some art studios there we've been working in. All right. So this page is still wet, so I'm going to put some wax paper in here. And this is what I was talking about. Now we have like this backwards of feeling. And this is such an opportunity. So you might turn to a page like this and be like, oh no, the ink bled through. What am I going to do? But this is just, in my mind, an exciting opportunity to think how can I turn this into something else, right? So for me, what I'm thinking is, okay, so I see that word feel, and my brain can still read that says feel. And so what if so kind of in response to this word feel that's coming from this other page, like what if we do this idea of feeling more? And so with something like that, you could leave it as it is and add color and do all sorts of other things to it. But you also might think about what do you want to feel more of, right? So thinking about your journal as a container for the things you want to bring more of into your life. And this is a swirl crayon. So we'll see what it ends up spitting out. But I want to feel more joy, peace, stability. The other thing to think about is turning your journal in lots of different directions as you're writing. Anytime I'm pausing like this, it's like, I personally, wonder, am I censoring myself or am I really just kind of thinking about what is coming next? I try to, as quickly as possible, move through that, but you might find that when you're writing, like, I'm not sure what's next. I'm not sure what's next. Instead of giving up, give yourself a moment to pause and then think about, okay, what do I want to feel more? I want to feel more. Okay, so now I've got all the things I want to feel more of. And this swirl crayon ended up having some green and some blue in it, which is great. Colors that I resonate with for that idea. And I've got this little bit of gridded, somewhat translucent paper. And I wanted to try this out with the nori paste for a couple reasons. One is we tried marbling on this paper not so long ago, and it did something really interesting where one side, the marbling kind of sunk into the grid pattern, and it was really interesting. So I wanted to see what would happen with other media other than this solvent-based marbling media that we were using. I also like the way that the grid paper looks with this bleeding through from the other side. Kind of funny to think about this idea of feelings and then gridded paper, right? Feelings don't often fit in neat boxes. Kind of the theme of today and the theme of this journaling session. Sorry, I need to switch to short-handled brushes. So I'm putting nori paste over the crayon, which means that in some of these spots, I won't be able to use the crayon as resist. And the only drawback that I've found for my own journaling practice and using nori paste as an adhesive versus using matte medium is the nori paste, if I go back over this with watercolor, it doesn't resist in the way that matte medium does. And, you know, in some cases, that's fine. It's actually good to be able to paint back into something. But if you like the way that I do, that resistive edge of the matte medium, you might want to add a little bit of that in. So I'm going to add a little matte medium on here. And this will just give me like a little bit of a surprise of certain areas. I think that little baby quail just wants to be a star, wants to be on screen. So it's warm, so the acrylic is drying pretty quickly. You can see it's pretty well dry on this side. So I think I can go in with a little bit of watercolor on this side without making too much of a mess. And I'm going to go in with something that's going to pop a little bit more. I'm going to spray this first, actually. That's really satisfying and fun. So this, where the nori paste is over the crayon, is actually going to do the work for me of this idea of text getting lost and then being found again, right? Because it's kind of getting obscured in the areas where the nori paste is over the top, and then it's resisting again here where there's no nori paste. The other thing, I guess a benefit to using nori paste if you're going to be journaling for a while is a little easier on your brushes than acrylic medium, which is why I like those brush top containers that I use, because then I don't have to worry about a brush that has acrylic medium on it. Although this brush has gotten a little bit of acrylic paint on it, and it's a water brush, so I will wash it well afterwards. One of the places where I worked as an art therapist, there was a guy that was very disgruntled about the other people who were there, very disgruntled about their way of treating brushes. And so he wrote this very long, very, very long instruction manual on how to properly care for brushes. It was actually really useful, but it was just the tone of it was maybe not received so well by his peers. That is pretty funny. Okay. So I always feel like the O in more needs a little bit of extra something. So while this is still wet, this is acrylic paint into watercolor. Again, you get that fun bleeding around the edges. It just feels like a little bit, something a little more interesting. And this is summer journaling after all, like we said last time, so I feel like some bright colors are important. Plus, it's not my normal palette, but neon yellow and this rich blue is kind of great. Just a little bit of accent there. Okay, carefully, I'm gonna set this aside. And we'll go back here to see how this is doing. So you can see we successfully were able to mostly keep that center line from looking too like a line down the middle of the page. Okay, so I have one more thing I wanted to show, incorporating in okay, so I wanted to show incorporating something in from like food labels. So this was from a salt container, and I love the graphic on this. I think it's so fun, and it just feels really exciting. And I had this color wheel that was already on here from shout out to Enzo, some things we did at Enzo. And I don't really want to lose the center of it, and I don't want to block all of it, but it might be kind of interesting to put this on here. And this, I've been trying to peel it away from its back, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I think this is going to be a job a little too big for our nori paste friend, unless I can get it right here. Sometimes you just have to work at getting the ephemera to be ready to stick down. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. So we'll switch over to a little bit of, actually, we should use, is from last box. So if you are new to this idea of ArtJournalSnacks, we have a different adhesive in each box. And we did this tacky glue pen, which is perfect for this kind of a thing. And actually, because of what I see is on the other page, I was going to cut this apart and have two pieces of this label on here, but I think what I want to do is wrap it around the edge, especially because this book is a little bit fragile. The paper is very, very thin, old book paper. And this is a page that needs a little bit of a clamp to help hold it together for a bit. So we'll just do that. And that'll help that stick. So I started working on this page the other day, and it's another one that I feel like needs just like one more thing. I have that red poppy there, and maybe just filling in a little bit more color. Maybe not filling these in all the way, but just a little bit of color. There's some green in there too. And there's some yellow. So I'm looking at the colors that are here in this poppy to kind of inform what I'm putting into the color wheel. I guess what I should have done is some kind of salt technique onto this page since it's got a salt label, but hindsight, artistic hindsight. And then just to go back to this idea of writing, since we've been focusing on that this time, is you could, with these lines that I drew out extending from this color wheel, I could write in very tiny print all along those, right? So every line in your journal is an opportunity to write something. Okay. All right, so I wanted to pause for a moment and see if there were any specific questions or things that people were curious about or wanted to ask or wanted to see more of. Go ahead and ask into the chat. I'd be so happy to answer. Oh, nice, Gabriel. I'm glad you got some swirl crayons too. Yeah, there's like swirl ones, and then there's another one called confetti, I think. And they're fun because, again, they're unpredictable. So this idea of using a material that you can't control can be a really useful way to play in your journal, right? Because can't control a lot of things in life. So art media, a lot of times, aren't any different. All right, well, if there are no questions, I'll just show a couple more things I've been playing with here. Okay, first of all, this is like one of those things that's an ephemera dilemma, right? Because look how fun this is. Right? This is where these were the pensive patterns. Do you feel pensive when you look at these? But then look at these two on the other side. I mean, look at those bows on that dress. So this is going to be one I might have to end up taking a photocopy of and doing something with these patterns. So I think I'm going to hold that aside for the time being. But I wanted to show a little bit. This is that same paper. So that same paper that I was using with the nori paste that had all those fibers in it, this is a rubbing. So I glued it down with nori paste on this side. And then on this side, I did a rubbing with colored pencil to get that effect. And so this idea of texture on one page can become texture or pattern on the other page. So really thinking about that when you're, especially if you're making a page that's very highly textured, how else can I play with this, right? Same thing here. This was actually not using vinyl letters anywhere in this book, but using the leftovers from where I've peeled those vinyl letters away already. And it's just the blank, empty thing. Don't throw it away because you can make this interesting texture that can become something else. And then here's that page that we played with last time. And I'm still deciding what I want to do with it, but I thought it might be a good receptacle for some of the leftovers from today. So I've got a little bit of the gridded paper left and a little bit of this rice paper left, tiny bit of this one. So I thought it would be good to just stick the rest of this down somewhere. Again, while I'm still deciding with this page what it wants to be. So because this is watercolor, it is going to blend a little bit with the nori paste. And a little bit of grid paper. I feel like I'm doing it all on this side because this side is closer to me. So I'm going to turn the journal around. When you're playing with backgrounds and just kind of making textures for yourself, that's a good tip, is to sometimes turn the book upside down. And you should let us know in the chat if you've ever done the thing that I've done, which is to be working in a journal and then realize you're like 3 or 4 pages in and you've been doing everything upside down or backwards. And the journal had a beginning, but then something happened and everything was upside down for a little while. It's just one of those things that you figure it out, right? Figure out how to make it work. Make it into something meaningful. Or if you really hate it, rip the page out or paint over it. All right, and since I have these 2 pieces of bleeding art tissue here, and we've got a little bit of time, I'm going to go ahead and put these on. I'm going to use the spray bottle again. And put it down with some wrinkles. I'm going to get this really wet because we're close to the end, so I don't have to worry about having to turn this page. And then this brush still has a little bit of that kind of sparkly ink on it. So we use a little bit of this water that's still on the page to blend a bit of the bleeding art tissue pigment out from it. And also put a little bit of this metallic ink onto it. Baby bird is saying, okay, what are you doing? Do one more thing. All right. So this page has very quickly gone from very simple, right, just a page split in half with color on top, to something that will eventually become something more interesting. You can see it really soaking in there, which is fun to play with. All right. I think I want a little bit more of that yellow coming up from below. Brings a little bit more warmth into it and takes a little bit of the neon out. So if neon is not for you, think about using the non-neon version of that color with it, and then suddenly it becomes maybe not quite so bright. Okay. And I feel like this page wants one more dark thing, but maybe since I can let it sit here for a bit, I'll just go in with a little bit of dark chalk. And why not? My hands are already messy. Let's just go for it. Okay, so I think that's where I'm going to leave that one today. We're at the very close of our time together. We made very big messes. So just a few more tips about writing in your journal that might be useful. Maybe you don't want to write in your art journal itself. You would rather write elsewhere, write Post-its at your desk, other pieces of paper. You can incorporate that writing in. You can also think about things that you've typed out, right? If that's a faster way for you to think, you could think about typing and then printing it and then putting it into your journal that way. Another form of writing that I didn't show today, but I know you've all seen me do before, is all of the mail that you receive, right? Especially like lovely notes and letters. Those are beautiful things to incorporate into your journal and incorporate a little bit more of that text, a little bit more of the kind of journaling side of journals into your book. Wanted to see if there are any last questions, and also give a shout out to Mix if you want to request what we might do in our final session. You should let me know, because I'm happy to respond to that and see where we might work that in. Thanks. Great. Well, I think the other challenge that I have for you all, if you are an ArtJournalSnacks subscriber and there's a material that you haven't used yet, or if you're not an ArtJournalSnacks subscriber and you have an art supply that's just kind of sitting there on your shelf, or you haven't been brave enough to try it, really do try it. Try writing something with it. Try making marks and then writing on top of that. Don't be afraid of your art supplies. They're there for you to use, right? They don't do you any good sitting in a drawer, sitting on your desk, or sitting in a bag. They're meant to be used. They're meant to be played with. And sorry, but they're meant to make messes with as well. So hope that you have a lot of fun doing that. And it's a great joy to do this with all of you and to share this practice that's been so important in my life for a very, very long time. Thank you for joining us. We have one more live stream left for the summer box, and then we also have ephemera hour. But of course, there's lots of play happening elsewhere. So we'd love to see if you created something. So please post it or show me if you're someone I know in real life. And I look forward to journaling with you some more. All right, everyone. See y'all later. Go make some messes or go clean up your messes.